1 in 3 is intended for mature audiences. Episodes contain explicit content and may be triggering as they often include violence and other varying forms of abuse such as emotional, psychological, sexual, and physical. In most cases, names have been changed to protect all involved. Please note, statements and opinions of guests do not necessarily reflect those of my own. Hi, warriors. Welcome to 1 in 3. I'm your host, Ingrid. I have learned so much over the last few years from experts and survivors alike on the multiple forms that domestic abuse can take. My guest today, Lynn, shares her story, which includes financial, legal, physical, and post-separation abuse. She also brings forward a topic that not many people have heard of, reproductive coercion. If you're like me and unfamiliar with this topic, you're going to want to lean in. Here's Lynn. Hi, Lynn. Welcome to 1 in 3, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, before we get into our discussion, could you give some of a background just so everybody gets to know you a little bit?
Sure. So my name is Lynn Stroud. I am a survivor of multiple types of abuse, including sexual assault, reproductive coercion, domestic violence, and also post-separation abuse, and I would say systemic abuse by the family court.
That's a big one, and I think a lot of listeners are familiar with domestic violence and sexual assault. The reproductive coercion, I think, may be a term that individuals are unfamiliar with, and post-separation abuse, I think probably a lot of people are familiar with it, but don't necessarily know that's what it's called. But before we get into all of that, do you want to just share with us a little bit of your personal story?
Sure. So regarding the reproductive coercion, in a sense, reproductive coercion is any sexual act in which you are inhibiting another party's autonomy and reproductive choices. And that can really include so much. For instance, what happened to me was I was 20 years old. I was dating a man who was older than I was. And we had been dating for several months. And all that time, I was actually on birth control. I was on the pill. And I thought that was a pretty trusted, form. I was okay with it. But I went to go see my gynecologist for an annual exam. And she said, you're a young woman on the go. Maybe you'd like to try out this new thing so you don't have to remember to take the pill every day. It's a patch that you stick on. And, it's pretty new on the market. And I thought, okay, this sounds great. I mean, you just put on a patch for the week and then you don't have to think about it. And I said, do I have to worry about anything? She said, no, it'll stay on in the shower. I said, great, and marched on out of there. I went on vacation to an island, and the minute I set foot in the water, the patch came off. So apparently it had been tested on shower water, but hadn't been tested in salt water, I guess. Either way, it came off. So I come back after vacation and, my boyfriend at the time and we had already had sex. It wasn't anything new to us, but I sat down and said, look, we have to be incredibly careful right now because the patch came off. I haven't been taking the pill, obviously. So we need to figure out something. And he was always the type of guy who would say, I don't want to use condoms. I don't like them. They take away the feeling. It's excuses that so many men will use so that they can get out of using one. And so we decided that we were going to use the pull-out method, and we agreed on it beforehand. It wasn't, I think, the best idea that we've ever had, but it was consensual and it was agreed upon. And so we started having sex, and I'm reminding him the entire way through, don't forget, you said you were going to pull out. Don't forget. And he's getting irritated with me. And he's saying, I won't forget. Well, the end of the sex came and he did not pull out. And he completely went back on his word. And all I could think to say was, what the hell did you just do? I mean, I was in complete shock. And I felt really betrayed initially. And the way all he could really say, and it was very flippant and with zero emotion, was, "Sorry, I forgot." So, of course, we had argued about it after that. And that sex had actually eventually gotten me pregnant. So, um, I had gone about 2 weeks, and ended up, my period was late, and I took a test, and I remember just being so angry with him and so upset and confused. And I was in the middle of college. I was still living with my parents. I was in no way ready to become a mother. Um, and when I called him and told him I was pregnant, he said, again, with zero feeling, "Okay, well, let's just get married."
No.
hmm And so we went back and forth and we argued about it. But every time I would say to him, "Why did you do this?" after we agreed, he would just say, "Well, I was drunk and I forgot." But as the relationship went on, I started to realize that as he was putting more and more pressure on me to go forward with the pregnancy when I wasn't ready to, and trying to trap me into a relationship with him that I didn't know if I wanted or not, he, I believe 100% that he intended to do what he did, and that he wanted to get me pregnant to trap me into a relationship with him.
That's something that I guess throughout the years, you always hear of women trying to entrap men by getting pregnant. So this is, I think, a concept that not very many people are familiar with.
Absolutely. I think, and it can absolutely happen woman to man. It's definitely not specifically a gender-based crime, but I think generally I feel like there is an overall gender bias to the crime, because if you're in a relationship, and at that point I didn't know enough, I was too young to really have a good handle on it, and it was too early in the relationship for me to know, but this was an abusive relationship. After I terminated the pregnancy, he went from maybe the first few months being controlling and jealous, and kind of cold, to being blatantly abusive, because he blamed me for not wanting to go through with the pregnancy. So then he started to become, verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, extremely manipulative. And so I think when you have a relationship like that, where there is one partner who is looking to entrap the other one and inflict this kind of control, I feel like women can so easily be taken advantage of. And there are other ways that it can happen. It's not just the actual sexual act. It's like what he tried to do with me, trying to influence my reproductive choices, to go one way or the other. It could be that there's a woman that wants to keep the child and the man doesn't want her to, and so he might try to pressure her into terminating the pregnancy. And if it's a relationship where, let's say the man in the relationship makes more money than the woman and there's financial abuse going on, if you refuse to provide your partner with reasonable finances to, either support the pregnancy and get some reproductive treatment, or if she doesn't want to go through with the pregnancy and you intentionally withhold funds for her to get an abortion, that's also reproductive coercion. And there's so many ways it can happen.
Yeah. And I want to get back to your story a little bit, but let's talk a little bit more about reproductive coercion since you started describing some. Are there more examples of
Yes.
what it can look
Yes.
like?
Okay. So this would be kind of an overall list of ways that reproductive coercion can happen: hiding or destroying contraceptives, tampering with condoms, and some of the information that I might want to talk about today would be stealthing. That is what stealthing is tampering or removing a condom without the other party's notice. refusing to use contraception, withholding financial access, lying about fertility or contraceptive use, guilt and manipulation, forced unprotected sex, physical violence, forcing someone to have an abortion, preventing someone from having an abortion, intentionally causing them to have a miscarriage, or pressuring them to continue with a pregnancy that they don't want to continue with.
And this can happen regardless of what kind of relationship you have.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So I think there's a lot of misconception of what can happen when you're married and there are obligations as a spouse that some of those items don't apply because you're married.
Right. Right. And I feel like there are, I'm sure that this happens I think many women have heard my story and have kind of had an aha moment and have realized, wow, I may have been really close to that, or that did actually happen to me. But where it was more of like a dating circumstance, or, maybe it was a one night stand that turned into something else. But I think that if we were to take an accurate depiction, and I mean worldwide, I think this is probably something that affects so many married couples, especially in a society where there's patriarchal aspects.
Yeah. And then you don't even necessarily know it's happening or it has happened until all of a sudden you're pregnant. Or if it's the other way around, the woman telling the man, I'm pregnant.
Right. Right.
Okay. Why is it important to understand what reproductive coercion is?
So I think it's so important for everyone to recognize these signs, not just women, because when it happened to me, like I said, this was over 20 years ago, and I lived in a state at the time where I did have access to terminate my pregnancy. Unfortunately, in the last few years, with the reversal of Roe v. Wade, we have so many couples and so many individuals residing in states where they can no longer get reproductive access to certain things. And that not only puts their health at risk, but it really is something that can change the entire trajectory of your life.
Yeah, I can. And I think that it goes beyond just, I want to have a kid. I think in probably most of these cases, there is some control aspect, which is when there's a power imbalance or somebody is trying to wield control, then that's an abusive situation.
And it's really just kind of one of the warning signs, if for me at least, because this was fairly early in the relationship. I want to say I was maybe dating the guy for 4 or 5 months. And so there were other signs, like I mentioned, the possessiveness and the jealousness, the controlling behavior. I think at that time, I don't even know if the phrase or the term coercive control existed. And now I think we're seeing it everywhere, but it was absolutely a red flag. And so I think it's really important for people in relationships to recognize that there are very specific warning signs, and even maybe some that are a little bit more nuanced. And it could be someone pretending to want to share a life with you, which is originally the way that I took his intention. I took it that, well, the second I found out he was pregnant, so he's doing the honorable thing. But later on in the relationship, I realized that, his intention for doing so was completely insidious, and that what he essentially wanted was control.
Yeah, it is, I imagine, a situation where it'd be very easy to mistake it as a romantic gesture. I wanted to just comment quick that a lot of times in abusive situations, when the abuser starts to realize their loss of control, that's when they step up the abuse. So by you taking control over your body and your pregnancy, you took his control or his perceived control that he had over you away. And then escalated the abuse.
Absolutely. Right. And I think that because there was already a power imbalance there, I think because he was older than me, because I was still in college and still, mostly dependent on my parents, he already had begun his career. He had his own money. He was a little bit more established than I was. And I think he recognized that imbalance. And he recognized that there was like a different amount of power in the relationship. And I think when he couldn't get it that way, you're absolutely right. He, it definitely stepped up a notch and became much more dangerous.
So you mentioned other forms of abuse. Was it all from this same man?
So I spent years, I think, going from one relationship to another where there was some form of abuse. In that relationship, it was mostly verbal and emotional, and then there was the reproductive coercion. I was in a relationship before that when I was about 18 years old. And I always thought, like, if you had asked me years ago to describe that relationship, I would have probably described it as tumultuous, which is, I would have never in a million years said it was abusive. But thinking back, there was a time where he was absolutely physically abusive and strangled me. And I actually was so shocked at the moment that it happened that instead of confronting him about it, I buried it. I buried it in the back of my brain, and it was almost like a space, like it never happened. I was in another relationship when I was in my late 20s where I was dating the man for, a while, probably several months. And I was at the point where I felt like I trusted him, and he became violent one day when we were alone and sexually assaulted me. And then several years later, I ended up meeting my first husband. And in the beginning, I thought, I had won the lottery. I thought, wow, this is my person. He seems to kind of mirror me in every way. He seems to understand. Little did I know that was the beginning of narcissistic abuse and financial abuse, because he kept telling me after we got married, I really want you to quit your job. You don't need to work anymore. And then once I did quit my job, the narrative completely changed. And it went from we're a team, we're in this together, to he would say things like, I made this money. You're not working. You don't have access to any money. This is my money. You don't have a right to it. So it became that. And there was so much more going on. I mean, my first husband gambled. He abused his pain medication. And after our daughter was born, he seemed to become jealous of the bond that I had with her. And it took so much for me to have her. I mean, I, went through a couple years of fertility issues where I couldn't get pregnant. Then once I started getting pregnant, I just kept having recurrent miscarriages. And that happened for several years. And then I finally give birth to this beautiful, perfect little girl. And he turns, completely evil on me. And not only that, but doesn't want anything to do with either of us. He starts going to work and doesn't want to come home at night. He's hiding money from me and withholding information. And I have no idea what's going on with him. Not only that, he doesn't want to help with the baby. Even when he does come home from work, which is rare, he doesn't want to do anything with her. He doesn't want to bathe her. He doesn't want to hold her. He just seems like he's not interested. And so we ended up splitting up when my daughter was about 11 months old. And the post-separation abuse that I experienced by him was probably some of the most damaging. And that's odd to say for someone who has been physically sexually assaulted. But I think the post-separation abuse was almost worse in a way, because I feel like I was kind of screaming into the void. Like I would get on the phone every day and I was talking to my lawyer saying, I don't feel safe. And I'm the one who's taking care of this baby. I have to figure out how to pay the bills on this house. I have to breastfeed her. I have to make sure that she's cared for. And now I have to figure out how to go back to work again because my soon to be ex-husband told me to stop working, and now I don't have any of my own money. He was withholding child support, all of the things, all of the terrible things that you could do to the mother of your child. That is what was happening.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what a lot of people don't understand is that post-separation abuse, it can look like not paying child support, using the legal system to drain your finances, drain your sanity, more or less. And if there are no children involved, post-separation abuse can be stalking, harassment, ongoing, like if there's any financial ties, again, using the legal system and financial abuse to just continue exerting control or attempt to control you. And a lot of times I've heard a lot of stories where the children are used as pawns. Like for what you said, he did not spend any time with your daughter. Well, I've heard stories where the father has not spent time with their children or a very minimal amount of time, and then all of a sudden is very insistent on having equal custody. And even when they have equal custody, they're sending the kids off to somebody else's house to spend the night and whatever. So yeah, post-separation abuse is, I believe itself, very traumatic.
It definitely is. Yeah, I noticed with it, my own ex-husband, that he, got a certain amount of visitation when we initially settled the divorce, which was probably when my daughter was about 2, and he wasn't taking that visitation. But every time he would get a new girlfriend, then all of a sudden he would want to visit my daughter, and he would want my daughter to meet whoever this new supply was. So then he wanted to create this facade that he was this active father and this loving, doting man. And the other women had absolutely no idea what was going on. The only thing they were hearing was how awful of a person I was from his perspective. So there's all this triangulation going on as well. And
Yes.
it's all being
Yes.
pitted against me.
Yes. And triangulation it's an important concept because to understand, because it is pitting two people who may not even ever communicate with each other against each other. But then what can happen is they can twist the narrative. So right now you're the bad mom and this new girlfriend is this great, wonderful person. And I need you to step in and be the kind of mom that my ex can't be. And if she becomes more of a permanent fixture and a more of a prominent position in your child's life, then all of a sudden things will twist. And it's, oh, my ex-wife never did something like that before. You have no idea how to be a mom. So it's very twisty, turny, confusing, and just gross,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah. My ex-husband actually got another woman pregnant while we were still legally married. So, like, right before the divorce was final, he got someone else pregnant, and we had just signed the divorce decree. And I want to say a few days later, I had this conversation with his girlfriend at the time. And when I first met her a few months before that, I just got a really bad feeling about her. There was just something about the way that she was acting. She was trying to sort of like hide herself and put her hood over her face as if she didn't really want me to see who she was. And she didn't really come out and introduce herself. So just something really kind of just told me that there was something off. And I've been a paralegal now for over 20 years. And I think just, kind of bells went off in my head that was like, you need to look into this person. And I had a legal right to. At that time in our decree, we had information in there. It was specifically stated that if one person was starting to live with, someone else, that the other party, that they should supply their information to the other party so they could do a background check on them. So I kept begging for her information, and he kept refusing to give it to me, even though the order said he had to. So eventually I dug around a little bit and I found her name and her date of birth because she had it posted publicly on her Facebook page. So I guess that's a warning to anyone out there. If you don't want people to find out stuff about you, keep your birthday off Facebook.
Goodness.
Yeah. And so I did a little background check and found out that she had a pretty extensive criminal record. And we're not just talking misdemeanors. There were a few minor things on there like public intoxication and driving under the influence and theft. But I just kept thinking, I feel like there's something here that I'm missing. And it turns out I looked into a different county, and she had a felony on her record for possession of methamphetamine.
Oh my God.
And when I told him about this, he called me a liar. And he said, I don't believe you. And I was like, I'll send you the paper right now. I will take a screenshot of it with my phone. I have absolutely no reason to lie to you. And so I dug up all this information. So I had a phone conversation with her at some point, and in that phone conversation, I said to her, "Look, I've pulled up your records, and I don't certainly want to judge you for your past, but it's looking a little concerning. I mean, I have a 2-year-old daughter, and you're spending time with her." And that was when I found out that she was pregnant, and that was maybe a few days after we had signed the divorce decree. She said, "Oh, I'm clean. I wouldn't be using. I'm expecting."
Oh
And I
my
thought,
God.
wow, what a pair, these two. Like, they are truly made for each other. So, and in just a little side note, cut to months later when the baby was born addicted to meth. And CPS took the baby away from both of them.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And yet still, if were to look at my situation on the whole, I would be labeled probably by exterior parties as the problem.
I was just about to say that. I'm sure you were considered the controlling parent, alienating your daughter from her father. But if you hadn't done all of this, your daughter would have been exposed to meth.
Right. Right. God knows what was in that apartment that they were living in, what they were doing together. Luckily, they are no longer together, but they still share a child.
Oh, that is so terrible. And it's not even like, I didn't want to imply that they would have been giving your daughter meth, but I mean, if it's laying around the house, she picks it up, but like while she's in their care.
Yeah. And what
Oh
kind
my
of care can
gosh.
you provide to a child while you're that high?
Right.
I mean, like, we're talking about a toddler. Like, he started dating her before my child was even 2. So
Oh
we're
my
talking about like a
God.
toddler walking around that's completely dependent on you for food, for changing her diaper, for keeping her clean, for playing with her, for keeping her safe. And you're using meth and who knows what else. And it was so disturbing because I can't tell you how many lawyers I reached out to. And I live in Central Texas. And so many of them told me, you should just keep your mouth shut. So many of them said, no one will care. Unless one of them tests positive for drugs, no one will care. And so at the time the baby was born, and the baby was addicted to meth, and I was like, well, okay, this is a clue, folks, because the newborn baby did not go grab the meth itself. So clearly she was using while she was pregnant. But by that time, she and my ex had ended their relationship. So basically, what I was told by CPS, lawyers, everyone was, if you can't prove that he is using and he has broken up with her, then there's nothing you can do. One lawyer actually told me, and this is probably one of the most disgusting things I've ever heard, is as soon as I found all the criminal records, I called my attorney. And before the divorce was even final, I said, look at all this information that I've pulled for you. I've basically done all of your legal research. Now I need you to help me. And I need you to get some kind of protective order to keep this man away from my children, from my child. Sorry. And she honestly said to me, no one is going to care. And she said, I still can't believe this. I'm flabbergasted just saying it out loud. She said, many of the judges in your county use cocaine and they are not going to care.
See,
that was what she said.
This is what we're up against, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to prove you're a victim. Once you prove, if you can prove, I mean, people can go with bruises and still be not believed. You did all the work and still nobody wants to do anything.
Right. I feel like that's been the general theme of my case, because we reopened the case. I ended up remarrying, which, to be honest, I never thought was going to happen in a million years, because I think I was maybe around 36 when I got divorced. I had an infant that I was completely caring for. I had to go back to work. So I was just single momming it just every single day with a tiny person. And I thought, okay, well, there's no way I'm ever going to date again. That was just what I told myself.
Right,
I was
right.
like, well, I'm never going to get time to date. I mean, I'm still nursing this child. Like, who, but I ended up reconnecting, with a friend, and we hit it off and we started dating, and he became the father figure that she needed. And he kind of stepped right in and said, I really care about you, and I really care about your daughter. And so several years after we got married, my daughter started to spend a little bit more time with my ex-husband. He had remarried at that point and now had another child. So he has three different children with three different women. And my daughter, at some point, we were we're getting very, very worried, because she was coming back saying some really disturbing things that her father was saying to her. And we felt like there was psychological abuse going on and maybe more. And so we had hired a child psychologist to treat her when she was around 4 years old. And this was during the pandemic. So she was treating her virtually, but we thought, hey, whatever help we can get. And so one day, my daughter at 4 years old made an outcry of abuse against her father. She said that he had thrown something at her head, and that he was mean to her, and that he called her stupid. And so, of course, I looked right to the psychologist and I was like, well, you're the mandated reporter. And she said, there's nothing reportable here.
I see. Oh my God. This just pisses me off so much. So she didn't do anything.
She didn't report it. Eventually, we had a nanny at that time that was helping us out, because my husband and I were both working remotely, and we had just had a baby. So I had a 4-year-old at home, and I also had a 4-month-old at home when we went into lockdown. And so we're both trying to work our jobs, take care of these kids full time, because all the schools had closed down. And so at one point we hired, a few nannies and babysitters to come in for part of the day and help us. And my daughter ended up making the outcry of abuse to the babysitter, and she ended up reporting it to CPS, and CPS did nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Oh my God.
It was so, when I tell people, they either can't believe it or the reaction that you just had, they're so, disturbed and disgusted with this crooked, corrupt system that protective mothers are trying to constantly, like, it's like we're having war waged against us, and all we're really trying to do here is protect our kids.
Right. I have a friend. I have to be vague, so I don't do any identifiers here, but the therapist that was seeing her children and still sees one of them had posted on her social media how being a bad spouse does not mean you're a bad parent. And I said, Will, it depends on what kind of context you're taking that. If you have two people who just don't love each other and they are just living as roommates, but they are still kind to each other, I suppose that's not a good spouse. It's a good roommate. And those individuals could then be good parents, I suppose. But if you are talking in the context of abuse, which this person gets referred to in high conflict co-parenting situations, which I can't say an actual statistic because I don't know it, but I would assume it's near 100% of those cases have to have some form of abuse happening. You can't make that statement because a bad spouse, an abusive spouse, 100% is a bad parent.
Absolutely.
And I just feel like the system just wants to be more forgiving for the abuser than for the parent who is being abused. So you're either not advocating enough. Why would you let your child be exposed to that situation for so long? You should have left. But we're not going to really say anything to the abuser because he or she is sorry for what they did, but you left them in that situation. Or if you try too hard to advocate for your kid, that's when you're the alienator.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Oh, that just angers me so much.
And the judge that I had during my first case, we had gone to a temporary hearing, a temporary custody hearing. This was shortly after my ex-husband and I separated. So my daughter was maybe around 12 months old at the time. I was still nursing her. She was, I mean, at that point, she was eating food, but she was completely 100% breastfed. She wasn't taking bottles yet. Um, and that judge, who was a man, by the way, thought that it would be a good idea to give overnight visitation to a man who tested positive for cocaine several times.
How is that okay?
I never understand any of the decisions that are made. In my case, I feel like they are some of the worst decisions ever. Luckily he meaning my ex-husband, he stayed away a lot after that initial period. So mostly it was, my daughter was really being raised by myself and my current husband. He stepped in, we were dating from when she was about 2. And he did all the things that a father should do. He taught her how to ride a bike. He taught her how to read. He helped potty train her. And a couple years later, when we went back into court trying to request a modification, I got a female judge. And I thought, okay, great. Someone will finally get this. And I was reading up about her online, and she was saying, oh, I'm a mother. I'm a domestic violence survivor. And I thought, oh, good. She's going to get it like right away. She's going to be able to see through his bullshit. No, nope, not at all. She treated me like
How?
dirt.
How?
She told
Let's
me
take
I
the mother
wasted
thing.
her time. She
What?
was antagonistic to me during the entire 2-day trial. She raised her voice at me. She rolled her eyes. I mean, it was like basically being abused all over again. And it was like if someone could have taken all the nasty things that my ex-husband had done to me and all the disgusting text messages where he's calling me a loser and a leech and that I'm pathetic and that my husband is a goofy this or that, just like bombarding us with insults and that, it was like if someone could ball that all up and then hurl it at you like like it's a baseball at 100 miles an hour. That's what I felt like during that trial. And that was a couple years ago. And so that judge gave my ex-husband, sorry, 50-50 possession of my child. Because here in Texas, there are two different things. It's not just straight custody, it's conservatorship, which is where you split up making all the choices about your child. So a lot of people will have joint conservatorship where you make big choices together, like education and psychological treatment, big medical things, but you'll have different periods of possession. This woman gave my ex-husband 50-50 possession. So now I think when the trial finally wrapped up, my daughter was maybe about 5 years old. She had to go back and forth, week on, week off, which I felt was completely inappropriate for the situation, but also very inappropriate for her age. It's very young.
Yeah, that's too young.
Yeah. But I feel terrible.
50-50 with a man whose baby was born addicted to meth, who has 2 counts of, I mean, I guess not actually reported. I mean, his daughter said there 2 times that there was abuse. A man who had nothing to do with her. When you're, oh my God, and 50%, just like that.
Yep. Yeah.
That is so awful.
And I'm not the only person that judge has done that to. And um, I guess I can't ever say silver lining, because there's never really a silver lining to any of this. But one thing that I am thankful for is that um, so judges here, they serve a term of about 4 years once they're elected. Many of them are reelected. That judge in particular served one term and then lost her reelection. So she is no longer a judge. I am
Good.
very thankful, because it means that she cannot keep destroying families, specifically children and protective mothers, any longer. And to my knowledge, she has not run again, even in a different district. But the damage that she did in the 4 years that she was behind the bench put a lot of kids in danger.
That's what I don't understand. Like, I just don't understand. Why are you going to take the chance with a kid?
Mm-hmm. And I think the attitude generally here in Texas, and I can't speak for everyone, because, you might find a particular lawyer that it really cares. I've followed some people on Instagram that seem like they are, really fierce about protecting children. But a lot of them I don't know personally, and it's really hard to know what a lawyer is like based on, their website or their ads, but it seems like the general feeling here in Texas is, we don't want you to have any kind of reproductive choices as a woman. We want to make sure that we are repopulating the earth as fast as possible. But once your children are here on this planet and your pregnancy is over, we are not going to do a thing to protect your children.
And we're certainly not going to let you have the majority of the say of what happens to your children.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. I know we kind of went off of reproductive coercion, but I'm glad we did.
Yeah.
Because I mean, this stuff, it really pisses me off. And it wasn't that long ago. COVID was not that long ago. We're not talking about 1980, 1990, even 2000. That is so frustrating. Oh, okay.
And to be honest, I mean, just to circle back around to reproductive coercion, my ex-husband did start to pressure me to have another baby. And I don't mean, like right before we separated, when my daughter was maybe 11 months old. I mean 2 weeks after I gave birth. So I don't want to go into too TMI, but there are a lot of traumatic things that can happen to your body. First of all, birth itself is just traumatic, whether vaginally, C-section, you gave birth prematurely, whatever. Birth is so traumatic. It's the pain, the changes in your body, the things that can happen, just being in the hospital on all those monitors and everything. I had a little bit of a rough birth physically, and it was really hard to physically recover. I had stitches in some certain places, and I couldn't climb up the stairs for a couple weeks after I gave birth to that baby. I was living in a 2-story house at the time, and I had to pretty much just remain on the first floor. Steps were out of the question. And even with that, even with being 2 weeks postpartum and the doctor not even giving me the okay to have sex, he started really pressuring me to, when are we going to give her a little brother? I was like, that is some of the most unsexiest shit you could ever say.
Right.
To a woman who is not sleeping, let's just say ever. Let's just say don't say that to women ever. But it's especially, insensitive to say to a woman who has just given birth, who is tired and exhausted and, swollen and can't climb up the stairs.
Fluids coming out of every orifice.
Yeah. Just like, read the room, dude. Come on. Yeah. But the funny thing is, if you were having this conversation with, let's say, his current wife, she would probably think, she hit the jackpot. She has absolutely no idea the things that she has been lied about, the lies that she has been told about me, and she doubles down on it. She has made, comments online thanking that therapist that basically ignored her ethical and legal duty to report to CPS, thanking her and vilifying me. And it's terrible. I don't At this point in time, my daughter is several years older. She's still very much a kid, but she's older, starting to understand more. It's difficult for her, but the best thing that I can do is just keep being the stable parent. And the more time that she spends with us, the more time that she sees her mother being treated well by my husband,
Mm-hmm.
being respected, being supported emotionally, physically, all of that. It's better for her in the end.
And that's it. And what a difficult position to be in, to have to be that stable, calm parent that's not bashing the other parent that's abusive. And meanwhile, you're screaming in your own mind, like, this is not okay. What he's doing, he's an asshole. What he did to me, what he's doing to you. Not saying all of that because you actually truly do have the best interest of your daughter in mind.
Right.
And it's just a very unfair situation. You didn't ask for the abuse. You didn't ask for anything that happened after the abuse or the ongoing abuse to happen. And you just have to roll with the punches and do what you can.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. I'm gonna do a 180 and pull us back to,
Okay.
to reproductive coercion. So what you're passionate about that specifically. What are you doing with it?
So, one of the things is in the last several years, I've taken to volunteering more. I did, the 40 hours of training with a local domestic violence and sexual assault, assistance group here in Texas. And so, I wanted to make sure that I was helping other women as much as I could and children. Um, about I think it's almost a year ago now, I was asked to sit on the Southern Regional Advisory Committee for the Domestic Violence Hotline. I've incredibly enjoyed doing that. I also last year joined the Storytellers Collective. So I try to share my story as much as I can, not just as a warning, but to let other people know that they are not alone. This is happening everywhere. And I don't just mean everywhere in the US, I mean globally. This is a huge problem. With regard to reproductive coercion specifically, what I'm trying to do, and Texas is a tough state to crack, but my goal is to try to have reproductive coercion codified into the law and added in either to our coercion laws about domestic violence or our sexual assault laws, and have it actually be listed as a crime. Reproductive coercion is not really listed as a crime anywhere in the US. Stealthing specifically, which is we talked about the removal of a condom without the other party's knowledge. Stealthing is really only recognized in about 3 states in the US. It's California, Maine, and Washington. And in none of those states is it a crime, meaning if you wanted to get any kind of, relief or justice, you would have to file a civil lawsuit. So you'd basically be going for maybe, attorney's fees, punitive damages. It's not a crime. It's not treated like sexual assault. And so my goal is to change that.
And so you're starting in Texas. Are you hoping to then take it
I feel like if I can
across board.
crack it in Texas,
Yeah.
I'm
I
going
mean,
to try
you're
to
up
get it
again. Yeah.
everywhere, everywhere that I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. I have a question. Did you become a paralegal because of your story? Or is that what you were doing before?
I've been a paralegal for 22 years. I've never done family law. I think my focus has been a little bit varied, but I've done more corporate and, privacy and information security type of stuff. And then for the last several years, I've done a whole lot of work kind of like on the municipal local government level. But I feel like being a paralegal and gaining all this knowledge just from personal experience about the family court has emphasized my my fight in this. And I've done so much legislative research in the background. And so my paralegal knowledge has really come in handy there. And I've connected with a lot of people, a lot of other paralegals and divorce coaches and, people who are trying to make, reform in the family court. And so I've made all of these wonderful connections. And I feel like I've just gained so much knowledge. And so one of the things that I have created, my Instagram handle is called the Knowledge Exchange for Abuse Survivors. And essentially I kind of created that because I've learned so much from other people just going through this, you know, gosh, I mean, when I started this all, it was almost a decade ago that I separated from my ex-husband and had to start to really educate myself on not only family court law, but the reality of it that you don't hear about, the way it actually goes down. And so now I feel like I can go ahead and pass that knowledge on to other people. And I'm always, always learning things from the people around me. So if I can always keep it as a constant knowledge exchange, that is uh, a key priority for me.
Well, so two things that I wanted to point out. So one is, even though you have not worked in family law, still being a paralegal and having a little bit closer access, I suppose, to some great legal minds and legal help, you still faced all of these challenges with your daughter. So I do want to point that out because I know some people are going to be out there saying, well, I don't know anybody. I don't know anything about the system. It's a huge mountain to climb, but it's not a hopeless mountain to climb. And I guess within that brings me to my next point that I love about survivors who have gone through the trauma that they've gone through, and then they are turning around and saying, what can I do to help the next person? Because unfortunately, there's going to be an endless line of victims to follow. Hopefully one day it will end, but in reality, it's going to be a while if we do get to that point. But for you to take that and want to pass that knowledge on to others of, here, this is what I found out, so you don't have to go hit the books to find out some of this information or talk with all these other people, that's really great. I love that you're doing that.
Thank you.
So can you say again how people can connect with you, what that is
Yes,
again?
so I'll provide you with my Instagram handle, but I am also on LinkedIn. People can connect with me that way, and you can also get my contact information from the National Domestic Violence Hotline because I am still serving on that regional advisory committee, and so I am always happy to lend an ear. As a paralegal, I can't specifically give out legal advice. That wouldn't be ethical, but I can lend a friendly ear and give friendly advice, especially specifically about things happening here in Central Texas.
Okay, so before we close, did we miss anything that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so.
Okay. I know we had that little diversion, but I
Yeah.
liked that. Okay, so before we finally close, do you have any lasting words of wisdom or encouragement that you would like to leave with listeners?
So, my message to anyone who has been a victim of any kind of abuse, I know that it can feel overwhelming, especially if you are the victim of emotional, verbal abuse, psychological abuse, if your partner or previous partner was a completely toxic person, always remember that it is never your fault, regardless of what anyone tells you. Even if you are hearing that from a judge who is trying to shame you, or from an ex-partner, it is never, ever a victim's fault. And for the younger generation, I urge you to listen to some of these stories that are being shared and passed around, not just about the family court, but just about relationships in general, and trust your gut. If you feel like something is off in your relationship, it's probably off, and you are better off single than dead.
Yeah, incredibly important. Well, thank you so much, Lynn, for joining me. Thank you for those final words and the whole conversation.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful connecting, and thank you so much for giving me the space to share all this.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you again, Lynn, for joining me today, and thank you, warriors, for listening. I've included the links Lynn was referring to, as well as her 1 in 3 profile, in the show notes. I will be back next week with another episode for you. Until then, stay strong, and wherever you are in your journey, always remember, you are not alone. Find more information, register as a guest, or leave a review by going to the website 1in3podcast.com. That's the number 1, IN, the number 3, podcast.com. Follow 1 in 3 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1 in 3 podcast. To help me out, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. 1 in 3 is a .5 Pinoy production. Music written and performed by Tim Crow.